This next presentation is leveraging CI to shape your real-world evidence strategy. Geez, say that 3 times real fast. So we have 2 folks from Lifescience Dynamics who will discuss how CI can be used to inform and develop a successful RWE strategy. I wasn't going to say that again. So let me introduce Sumit Bakshi and Peter Kelly from Lifescience Dynamics.
Good morning. Still morning yet. Yeah. All right. So I think people are still coming in, but we'll give it a start. So just to kind of introduce ourselves, I'm Sumit Bakshi. For everyone here, this is my first Pharma CI. So I'm coming here for the first time. So yeah, I'm not the CI insider yet. Maybe next year, yes. Peter, my colleague, he's the CI brain here, and he'll be taking over the CI part. I'll be sticking to my domain expertise, which is real-world evidence. So that's the both of us. Lifescience Dynamics, just a little bit of introduction. We are a strategic decision support company. We have offices in North America and in Europe. And we as you would all know, we are a partner to most of you, many of you here. And you can come visit us at our booth. We have our team here. The agenda on the presentation, we are going to go through why should we be thinking about real-world evidence as CI professionals? Why is real-world evidence important? Then we will move to what I call as real-world evidence intelligence. It may be slightly different from competitive intelligence, but it uses the same principles. So we'll get into what is real-world evidence intelligence and come up with some concepts and case studies. And finally, we will conclude with some potential use cases on real-world evidence intelligence. So why is real-world evidence important? There is a lot of talk about real-world evidence, and I think the speaker in the morning, Steve, he set it up really well. That data is the next thing that CI professionals should be really thinking about. There is a lot of data, and that data is being harnessed. What we are going to talk about is turning that nebulous concept of data into something tangible as to how are pharma companies investing in data and converting it into evidence, and how do we conduct intelligence on the real world data before it becomes evidence. So that's the theme of the day, or that's the theme of the talk. So here we are looking at why is real-world evidence important. There are pressures on the pharmaceutical development process. There are cost pressures, there are timeline pressures, and we have seen that especially with COVID, with the development of COVID vaccines, how real-world evidence was leveraged to crunch the timelines as well as get the products to market really quickly, and aid the clinical development process with real-world evidence. So that's one big pressure. That's one big factor that's increasing the strategic importance of real-world evidence. Of course, there is regulator and payer demand. So regulators are asking for real-world evidence. Payers are asking for real-world evidence. Many of them have set up guidelines on how they would evaluate real-world evidence studies. Technological advances, as we heard in the morning today, they have resulted in advancement of curation of data, collection of data, and analysis of data. And therefore, there is an increasing supply of data. there is a lot of data that we have, real-world data that we have now. It's about harnessing it. It's about capturing it and processing it into evidence. So there is a lot of noise that we hear about real-world evidence. There is talk of data analytics, real-world data analytics. There is talk of analytics platforms, data curation, data lakes that companies are setting up. Is there real uptake of real-world evidence? That's what we as professionals who look at facts, we should be worried about, is it being really used? The answer is yes. So if we look at the marketing authorization applications that were made to the EMA in the period 2018-19, about 40% of them had some kind of real-world evidence component to them. So there was real-world evidence submitted as part of the applications. And on average, about 2 real-world evidence studies were submitted as part of these each application. So the regulators are using it. The regulatory applications are seeing an uptake of real-world evidence. Payer applications are also. So this is a comparison of applications that were made to NICE. And in 2018, about 40% of them contained real-world evidence studies. Whereas in 2021, the number almost doubled up. What does that mean for pharmaceutical firms? Pharmaceutical companies are also asking for data, are also requesting a lot of data. And the graph below shows pharmaceutical requests placed on 2 particular data sources in Europe. The SNDS, which is the French national healthcare health insurance data, and the CPRD, which is the primary care data in the UK. And we see that there is an increasing number of applications that are being made to these databases for conducting studies by pharmaceutical companies. So now that we've established that real-world evidence is important, let's see at what levels are pharmaceutical companies treating real-world evidence. So let's start from the most basic tactical level, which is where I guess a lot of pharmaceutical firms are still operating, which is using real-world evidence from for stakeholder management, either engaging with payers, engaging with KOLs, and so on. And then moving up the pyramid, inverted pyramid, to TA, therapeutic area or asset strategy, real-world evidence being part of therapeutic area or asset strategy, and they're establishing registries, they're doing burden assessments in diseases and so on, and they have set up TA-focused groups that in areas where real-world evidence becomes relevant, they have set up TA-focused or disease-focused groups that are generating real-world evidence. But there is a group of companies at the top of this inverted pyramid, which are taking up real-world evidence as part of their corporate or competitive strategy. And they're not only they're not only accepting real-world evidence and using real-world evidence, they are putting it as part of their strategy, as part of their vision. They are building an organization around data, a culture around data, and building capabilities and acquiring data assets as well. So I'll hand it over to Peter from here to talk about some use cases and case studies that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Sumit. I think for you all, we'll be thinking, okay, great, that's real world data. What does this mean to me? Why are we talking about it in a CI conference, and how to empower CI managers? Well, before I get there, I'm just give you a little kind of overview of what you might see in your organizations or kind of your competitors' organizations. So this is a little infographic we have from a project we've done looking at how competitors are building their capabilities and also how they're organizing themselves to leverage RWE. And we simplified it quite a bit. On the the x-axis, I guess we have, there's an inorganic strategy. You know what that is? They're buying a big company to bring in data or to give them the capabilities. We also see some competitors doing a more organic strategy of building up their own internal resources, building up their own data warehouses and their internal capabilities. Probably a lot of them are kind of in between these two different strategies, but that's what we see across the big competitors. And then if you go on the y-axis, there's different ways of approaching how you're going to tactically use and apply RWE. And maybe that's top-down, kind of set by senior management. This is how we're going to use it. This is our strategy. But other companies, we see more of a bottom-up approach of we'll find individual use cases within the business, and they will push it through some kind of governance to see if it makes sense, if this is something we should invest in, and how we're going to use it. But there's still kind of developing capabilities, both organic and inorganic, and how we're going to sign off or decide these things. Why this is relevant for you is because as a CI manager or as a CI function, you kind of see across all these different functions of the organization. You know, there may be a packet over in clinical development working on RWE or epidemiological studies to help trial design, and there may be some people in the commercial area that are working on real-world evidence for a label expansion or for some monitoring. And you guys in CI sit kind of right in the middle to be able to pull this all together and understand what's happening. Now, if I go on from this organic strategy or governance model, I also want to touch on something Sumit mentioned, which was just the noise. So in the last couple years, you've probably seen lots of more studies being published. This is just a PubMed search of RWE studies in oncology over a 5-year period. You can get the sense, you know, there's a lot more stuff going on. There's a lot more noise. There's a lot more things to talk about. There's a lot more potential for the CI team to come and kind of help make sense of that noise. Why does it matter? Interestingly, publications are going up, but corporate discussion of RWE, as evidenced here from, I believe this is an AlphaSense search, looking at mentions of RWE over this period, just kind of, it's mentioned in quarterly documents. If it's mentioned 15 times, it's just counted as once. But just give you some sense that some companies are talking a lot about RWE, and some not so much yet. So, you know, again, opportunity for CI teams to help kind of cut through the noise and explain what's happening and how it's being used. Now, finally, I can get on to maybe some case studies of what we've done and how we've used CI to inform RWE. But it's important to think of it as kind of this two-way street. Oops, I keep dropping out. Sorry, it's a two-way street. You know, you can use CI to inform your RWE teams, your RWE strategy, but you also can think about how you use CI to understand what the competitors are doing to enable their RWE strategy. So it's again, another core area where a CI team can help RWE strategy or RWE surveillance. A couple case studies I thought you might find interesting because it's still just a developing field. This first one is we did a competitive mapping exercise to understand the relative focus each of these competitors was putting on their use of RWE. Because, as Sumit said, and he'll say a little bit later too, there's so many potential ways you can use real-world evidence that it's kind of, you know, where do you start? And we found that these 4 competitors all had kind of a different starting point. So the big purple blot, the pharma company A, had said, you know, we care about it for regulatory, we care about it for reimbursement, but we think the main focus should be in asset development. So like clinical trial design or lead validation or studies of biomarkers. And so we're going to that's going to be our focus. And another one, the one on the bottom right, I want to call it because they thought, you know, everything we do needs to be looked at through the lens of how is it creating value for the business. So it can be in regulatory, it can be in trial design, but we think that we need to capture it strategically under this value creation. So hopefully you get a sense of kind of companies are still trying to find their way, understanding how to use real-world evidence, or how they can identify the value that's created by it. So it's not set in stone, it's still kind of an evolving landscape. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes, you know, you got a label expansion, you can measure how much value is created. Or you can use this in marketing and you can measure how value created. Or you can kind of optimize a trial design, you can measure that. But a lot of the times it's not as easily explicitly measured. Another case study I wanted to point out was a benchmarking we did of a competitor. Our client wanted to understand what its competitors were doing in oncology also. And just, you know, they hear a lot about what's happening in RWE, but they're not actually sure kind of what's the outcome. You know, is it a competitive advantage or is it just noise? So we looked at a handful of competitors using kind of 5 different metrics to understand different attributes of their RWE strategy, investment, and execution. I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically we looked at, how much are they spending in partnerships? How much are they buying in, like purchasing companies? What is their communication strategy? When they're doing something, are they talking about it actively, or is it just kind of lost in the ether? How are they measuring or talking about the value they've created by it? Not just we have this partnership, it costs this much money, but like, okay, what did you do with it? Why? And then the last one that I want to unpack a little bit more is internal commitment, because that was something we thought was a big differentiator. We have a lot of companies out there, competitors that invest a lot in real-world data and evidence. They buy something, they license something, they start a study. But it's not clear that internally they've empowered their teams to have the bandwidth or capabilities or technology to really leverage that data. And so to come up with this benchmarking metric from a CI perspective, we looked at a bunch of different kind of internal commitments that we could measure and help come up with this spider plot where the more advanced companies were on the outside of the spider plot, and the comparatively less advanced or less developed companies were on the inside of the spider plot. So, again, CI team helping to make sense of some noise or some strategic understanding or tactical understanding and inform their own internal decision making. See, just my time check, or not too bad, okay. So I just have 2 more case studies I want to show you, and I'm trying to get more specific now without letting you know who these clients are, but CI can also help the RWE team in understanding payer or stakeholder engagement. Like when push comes to shove, the people that I'm going to share this information with, how are they going to value it? How are they going to use it? And so in this study, we looked at, let's look at the number of publications, oncology publications, that we can see potentially being used for payers, whether they're on patient-reported outcomes or cost models, things like that. And so there's quite a disparity of kind of some companies are really pushing their understanding or use of RWE for payers. But we want to go the next step and say, okay, how are they actually using that? So we did that using primary intelligence, and interestingly enough, when we spoke to key stakeholders, we got a range of different opinions using CI that, they may have said something different under market research, but on CI, they were a little bit more open about where they see the limitations, and there's a lot of humming and hawing of, in 3 years' time, I'm sure it'll be different, which I'm sure in 3 years' time they'll say, in 3 years' time it'll be different. But we found some good insights for our client about, I guess the key one here that I'd point out was this: the biggest obstacle they saw was, they want real-world data that replicates what they've seen in the registrational trial. I mean, pretty obvious, right? But I mean, that was a big thing to them to overcome these limitations. So kind of help our clients' RWE strategies understanding, okay, what do I need to do to grease the tracks to some extent, so when I get there to these stakeholders, they're going to have buy-in. They're not just going to be like, yeah, that's great, but I don't really believe it for my decision making. So another good case for RWE. My last bit before I hand back to Samit would just be a small slide on quotes. Not very exciting to see graphics and quotes, but we found that primary competitive intelligence has been very important for CI, a very important CI tool for helping our RWE teams or carrying out or surveillance on RWE. And as Sumit will tell you later, a lot of the stuff we see in the secondary domain is just a tip of the iceberg. So being able to see what's going on behind the scenes, what falls to the wayside, what never makes light of day is an important CI tool. And again, as I said before on the previous slide, getting payers and getting some sources to give their full opinions in a CI context is very helpful. So that's me. Back to Samit. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So, as Peter said, some things may not see the light of the day, with real-world evidence. And there is attrition. 100 projects are started. We end up with maybe 40 resulting in publications. So what happens to the rest of the 60? We never know. But the other important aspect here is the overall life cycle of a real-world evidence study. So it is pretty prolonged, and it's it's not as much as a clinical trial, but it could be anywhere between 15 to 40 months, depending on the nature of the study, depending on lots of factors. And that 40-month period is when it gets converted to evidence. That's when it gets converted to evidence. So what we see published, one, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but two, it's too late for us to action anything. We have to get intelligence much earlier. So is there a possibility of capturing this window of intelligence, of getting information in this window of intelligence? And the answer to that is potentially yes, if domain experts, real-world evidence domain experts get involved. One thing to note here is that this information will not come up in a biomed tracker or an AlphaSense or any of the usual data sources that that we all might be used to. So it requires domain experts to step in and kind of uncover the sources from where this kind of intelligence can be obtained. For example, I referred to the French healthcare, the French National Healthcare Database, and if we were to look at the French healthcare, the National Healthcare Database at around anywhere between the 2 to 12 month period, 12 month period, you can get information about which companies are conducting what types of studies. So it's not just at a company level. We can do it at a therapeutic area level. We can do it at a disease level. We can pivot this information in many ways. But just an example here is to show there are companies with the French national health data. There are couple of companies that are by far the leaders in conducting real-world evidence studies. And this is the big pharma that we're talking about. 5 of the top 10 have been put on the chart. There are others that are bunched up. But the 2 clear leaders, one of them has a clear organizational corporate strategy to invest in data, to invest in real-world evidence. And the other, as the chart, the 2x2 chart that Peter had showed, which talked about, one, what is the organic or inorganic strategy, and two, how do they operationalize it? We see that the second one has instead of a centralized operational model, they have a very decentralized operational model, giving empowerment to local teams, giving empowerment to functional teams to generate real-world evidence. So yes, there may be a lot of redundancies in the evidence that they're generating. 2 different groups may be approaching the same study, from different angles, but then the volume of work that they're doing is pretty large. So can we conduct intelligence, on real-world evidence? Not on evidence, but the generation of real-world evidence. The answer is yes. When is this? When do we conduct this intelligence, and for what types of use cases? Now, it can be done across the development life cycle, and it could be done in the early stages to support opportunity assessments or to kind of inform clinical trial design, and many companies are using real world evidence there. So with a good analytical lens, one can arrive at, company X is using this kind of study in a certain TA to inform clinical trial design. So you can get to that level of granularity. Then there are, this is where most of the studies bunch up. This is where most of the studies happen in the regulatory, in the market access space, be it regulatory applications or payer applications, and of course in the post-launch space. So we've, I think we've established that real-world evidence is an area for CI managers to focus on. And, yes, I kind of mentioned that there is a need for domain experts to get involved, but is it rocket science? The answer is no. It uses the traditional CI methods. What we're doing essentially within RWE intelligence is landscaping essentially, monitoring, deep dives, but without the usual databases that we have. And of course, we have similar tools such as conference support and stakeholder views that we get to add to the basic CI methods that we are using. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Al. So we should have planted one in the audience, but maybe we kind of did.
Peter and Sabine, obviously an excellent presentation, and I'm not at all biased because we work together. It's very clear that real-world evidence is increasingly more important, and I don't think it was that way 15, 20 years ago. It's come to the forefront. It's very important for the success of any given brand. Now, I know that when you did this, Peter, you did it as a team. Do you think any pharma people here who are CI, they might just be a CI lead for a therapeutic area, is this something that one person can do? Anything that they would need to know, or how would they get their head around getting this off the ground? Assuming for the moment that they can do the secondary themselves. And then if you think of sort of 80-20 rule or 60-40 rule, how much can you get out of secondary alone before you really need to get those primary insights?
Yes, so that's a good question, Al. So can a CI person, a single CI person, do this? I would say yes, over time, with the right training, with the right with the right tools and understanding of real-world evidence, it can be done. Primary versus secondary. Everything that you've seen here, except for one slide that Peter brought up, is secondary. So there is a lot of secondary.
Wait, I'm the CI guy. I get to speak about that. Yeah,
yeah sure.
Well, can the CI team do that? I think CI managers are uniquely placed to have to kind of make sense of lots of different competing demands and kind of understand, okay, what are you actually trying to achieve? Like, I don't need to know what the data set is in detail, but my business customer, what are you trying to achieve, and what in my toolkit can I use to help you answer those questions? And which of your stakeholders need to be brought in line? So I think there is probably stuff that when I've done a lot of these projects where I'm not engaging with the actual databases or what they're being used for, but I can ask that basic question of kind of what's going to help you. How can I help you make that decision or inform your decision? So on the secondary versus primary, I think a lot of the stuff is in primary intelligence, which is true. But secondary intelligence gives you a good launch point to say, like, I know there's a lot of stuff I'm missing, but if I just look at each of the competitors on equal footing from a secondary perspective, what am I seeing? Is that the tip of the iceberg? And it may only be 20% of it, but I at least can take my snapshot of those companies may have explicitly put this in the secondary domain as part of their strategy. What does that tell me? But there's definitely primary intelligence really enhances that of kind of things that didn't work or what we're doing and then never see the light of day type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, from a secondary versus primary perspective, I would say yes. It will evolve from. Currently, it's more primary, but I think it will evolve from that to more of secondary, because there are secondary data sources that can be leveraged. They're not the traditional usual data sources that one looks at. So one has to look under the hood. And there are regulatory processes, regulatory data processes that enable that. For example, in Europe, there are transparency laws, and every piece of data that is released has to be publicized somewhere, right? So those are secondary data sources, and once you look under the hood, you can find out those data sources. And yes, of course, it can be kind of enhanced with primary CI.
Al, is that good? Is that, okay. Well, did we answer your question? Sorry, not.
Al always beats me to standing up and commenting or asking a question. I'll pay you later. How receptive are so within the organizations that you've worked with, you know, RWE folks tend to sit all over the place.
Yeah.
Maybe some are centralized, some aren't. So how easy is it for your CI people that you've worked with to find these groups, and how receptive have they been? Because when you think about competitive intelligence, you know, a lot of the RWE people, they're, you know, they're data experts, and they're like, well, you know, what are you going to offer? I mean, our data is specialized, RWE is specialized. So how receptive have the RWE teams been to CI, you know, trying to work more closely with them?
Well, but maybe we've solved for the ones that are receptive because they've come and sought us out and they've gone through the CI managers. But the people that I've engaged with in the projects I've worked on are receptive, and they understand. They've been trained a little bit by their CI manager on what we can do for them, how we can enable their thoughts or their strategy. And they've been pretty good at understanding, like, do we want to understand exact tactical uses, or am I just trying to understand how this company organizes themselves and decides what to do and what not to do? So they have been good in that sense. We still get some questions where you say, well, I'm never going to find that out. I mean, and what are you going to do with that? I mean, that would be nice to know, but that's great. But maybe it's just that. They've found the corporate intelligence, the market intelligence function, and I have this problem, can you guys help me with it? And then they open the door.
Any other questions before we wrap up and go to do the next session?
Just comment on the question you asked, because I spent about a good 6 months actually helping our market access team. They actually invited me to do a project with them just on this, looking at real world. And I think CI can contribute a lot, because basically we know the competitive environment, and sometimes it's really an accumulation of data and knowledge and knowing what's out there to help them even run studies. So it's, I see a really good collaboration there.
And it is, I mean, there may be a function doing outcomes research, but there are pockets of real-world data evidence and use all over the organization. And you see that in the studies we've done. There's still, it's come a long way the last 15 years, but it's still, you know, all over the business in different places. And it should be there because it needs to be where it's going to be used. But so there's lots of opportunities for a CI manager to help kind of, hey, I know the tool that can help you with this. Thank you.
Thank you.